Hey everyone, it's Tim here. Hope you're all very well. Yes, I have finally found my password for this YouTube channel. Firstly, I would like to thank all the new subscribers. I really appreciate it, all the positive comments you've left on my previous videos. Moving forward, I will try to be a lot more active here. If you do have any suggestions, feel free to let me know in the comments. Today's video, we will go over some of the most common mistakes people make when it comes to training legs. In this video, we'll look at the three main movement patterns for the lower body: the squat, the split squat or lunge movement pattern, as well as the hip hinge. Let's start with the squat movement. Here, I'll demonstrate the dumbbell goblet squat. However, the mistakes I will talk about will still be applicable for different variations of the squats. For example, a barbell back squat. Mistake number one, heels coming off the floor. Now, if we're just doing the standard squat, we don't want our heels to come off the floor. Instead, we need to keep them on the floor. In fact, think about pushing through your heels to come back up. If the heels are coming off the ground, that means we're transferring most of that force, most of that tension onto the quads and knees, which may be problematic if you have sensitive knees especially. That can give you a little knee pain. Mistake number two, knees collapsing inwards. Again, unnecessary pressure on the knees. So as you squat down, as you come up, think about driving your knees out in line with your toes. So if your toes are looking out this way, we want the knees to travel in that same path. That's number two. Mistake number three, hips shooting up. Basically, when you squat down, this might happen. So instead of just coming up with an upright torso, like this, you might find that your hips shoot up first and then you become upright. So that's another mistake we want to avoid in order to keep the tension off the lower back and on the legs. Another mistake is the knee lockout. So with the squat, as we go down and then come back up, we don't want to hyperextend the knees and lock them out, because that's just going to take the tension off the legs, of the quads, and just put it directly onto the knees. So we don't need to lock them out. I'll show from the side. So squat without that hyperextending. Very common mistake, completely unnecessary. Just come up, straighten out your knees, but don't lock them out. Another common mistake with the squats usually happens because of the idea of going down, all the way down is going to be more beneficial. What tends to happen to most people is when they try and go all the way down with the squat, their hips tuck under. It's actually called a butt wink. It's quite a funny name actually. Basically, it's when you squat down, down, down. At a certain point, it will depend on the person. The hips tend to round, and you can see, well, it's actually the lower back that rounds, causing that tucking under effect, the butt wink effect. Basically, what this is you're no longer able to keep a neutral spine, and that additional movements to go all the way down is coming from your spine, not because you're stretching your muscles. So it's not going to be any more beneficial when it comes to actually training your legs compared to just stopping at the point where you're still keeping a neutral spine. So any lower back drops, rounds, hips drop, neutral spine. That's going to be a lot safer for most people especially. So that's the last one for the squat, the butt wink. Next up, we have the split squat. So the first mistake I want to talk about here is very similar, well, same as the squats, is the front heel coming off the ground. This is usually because we are too close. Our front heel is too close to the back knee. Instead, in this initial position to begin with, we want a 90-degree angle at both knees. There, then go from there. This mistake, not necessarily a mistake, but a suboptimal way of performing this exercise will be by keeping a fully upright torso position, or even leaning back in some cases. I'll explain why. So with the split squats, if we're fully upright or even leaning back as we go down, this is going to do a poor job of loading the glutes, whereas with the standard split squats, we want to train both quads, glutes. So instead of being up here, we want a slight hip hinge, so leaning forward from the hips and sinking the hips down into the split squat. This is going to be much more effective when it comes to loading the glutes. Another mistake with the split squats is again to do with the knees. Just like the squats, we want to avoid completely locking out this front knee, hyperextending it, because again that's taking the tension off the muscles and putting it onto the joint, which is something we don't need to be doing. Again, just like the squats, we also want to keep an eye out for this front knee, as we don't want it to cave in as we squat down. Instead, keep your knee in line with your toes. Next up, we have the Romanian deadlift exercise, which is a hip hinge movement. It should emphasize the glutes and hamstrings. Your lower back muscles will isometrically work, so they will still be targeted as well, but primarily it's going to be a lower body focused exercise. So with the Romanian deadlift, we want to keep straight-ish legs. So from here, nice fully upright posture, hold the weights close to you. So a very common mistake with this one is rounding your spine to move down rather than thinking going back with your hips. So doing something like this is going to be pretty ineffective when it comes to training the hamstrings and glutes. Instead of this, thinking going down with your spine, think about keeping your back straight and just pushing your hips back while keeping the weights close. So hips back, hips forward, hips back, hips forward. So that's mistake number one, rounding at the spine and going down rather than keeping your spine neutral and thinking about going back. Another mistake with the Romanian deadlift is trying to keep looking up as you go down. So look something like this. It's very common actually, this one. The problem here is your neck is still a part of your spine. So as you try to keep looking up while going into the hip hinge and moving down, you end up creating this potentially vulnerable position for your neck, which can give you some pain. You want to avoid that. So as you go down, think about keeping your neck in the same spot. You don't want to stay looking up. Move your neck at the same time with your head. As always, if you're enjoying the content, feel free to subscribe and share the videos with anyone that might find this beneficial. If you have any questions, let me know in the comments. And also, if you're struggling to reach your goals, I do have an online coaching program, which you can find more information by simply clicking the link in the description.